Let's talk about Theranos. You've probably heard the name. It's the company that promised to completely change healthcare with just a single drop of blood. It became this absolute darling of Silicon Valley, but behind that curtain of hype was one of the biggest deceptions we've ever seen. Today, we're going to unpack the incredible rise and the spectacular fall of this medical marvel that turned into a massive cautionary tale.
It's a story that has everything: ambition, secrecy, and really the powerful idea that a good narrative can sometimes be way more convincing than the actual truth. So that brings us to the central question. How on earth does a startup built on a lie get to be worth $9 billion? Let's get into it.
So where does a story like this even begin? Well, it doesn't start in some huge corporate headquarters. Nope, it starts on the campus of Stanford University with a 19-year-old visionary who had an idea she believed would change the world. And that mission was incredibly compelling. Just think about it. From one tiny drop of blood from your finger, Theranos promised to unlock a whole universe of health information. We're talking hundreds of tests, from complex diagnostics all the way to DNA analysis. The whole idea was to make healthcare cheaper, way less painful, and accessible to literally everyone.
And boy, was she good at selling that vision. By 2004, using family connections and just the sheer power of her idea, Holmes had already pulled in an amazing $6 million in funding. The foundation, you could say, was laid.
Okay, so she's got the money. Now what? Well, this is where Theranos starts to transform from just an idea into what looked like an unstoppable empire. And this next part wasn't just about the technology. It was all about building this unshakable image of credibility. And the momentum was just incredible. Things were moving fast, really fast. The first prototype of their machine, they called it the Edison, came out in 2007. Then Sunny Balwani joins as the COO, bringing this new intense operational style. And by 2010, after more funding, Theranos hits a huge milestone. It becomes a unicorn, which in the startup world means it was valued at over $1 billion. Now, this is so key. The credibility wasn't just built on promises about some futuristic tech. No, it was manufactured through incredibly powerful connections. George Shultz, a former Secretary of State, was the linchpin. He didn't just lend his own famous name, he was like a magnet, pulling in other titans from politics and industry to join the company's board. I mean, just take a second and look at this list. We are talking about former secretaries of state, a future secretary of defense, former senators, top CEOs, the whole shebang. This board was basically a human shield of legitimacy for Theranos. With such powerful, respected people vouching for the company, who would even dare to ask if the technology actually worked? It created this aura of being completely invincible.
So this carefully crafted image, all this power and credibility, it had a massive, and I mean massive, impact on the company's financials. It led to an absolutely jaw-dropping valuation.
Between late 2013 and 2015, the company raised over $700 million. But what's really wild is who was writing the checks. We're talking powerful individuals like Rupert Murdoch, not just your typical venture capital firms. They weren't just buying stock. They were buying into the whole legend of Elizabeth Holmes. And at its absolute peak, this frenzy of hype and high-profile backing launched Theranos to a staggering $9 billion valuation. $9 billion. Elizabeth Holmes, who owned a huge chunk of the company, became, on paper at least, one of the world's youngest self-made female billionaires. And this right here gets to the absolute heart of the deception. The promise sold to the entire world was this revolutionary, one-of-a-kind device. But the reality? It was a machine that just didn't work. So to hide that, Theranos was secretly running the vast majority of its tests on regular old commercial equipment from other companies.
But you can't keep a secret that huge contained forever, right? It's almost impossible. So how did it all start to come apart? Well, the first cracks started to show from the inside.
And that brings us to the idea of a whistleblower. You know, that one person on the inside who sees something wrong and risks everything, their job, their reputation, to expose it. And in the Theranos story, the whistleblower was under immense pressure, especially because of who he was.
The key whistleblower was a young guy named Tyler Shultz. And you have to imagine the position he was in. He's a young engineer, he's passionate about the mission, and then he suddenly realizes the data is junk. The numbers don't add up. And to make things 1,000 times more complicated, his own grandfather is one of the most powerful people on the board defending the company.
So Schultz saw the fraud with his own eyes. The Edison machines would spit out data that was totally unreliable, failing all the quality control checks. Like, you could test the same blood sample twice and get wildly different results. This bad data would get sent off, but then somehow the final reports would come back validated, showing that the tests passed. It was a systematic cover-up designed to hide the failures and just plain falsify the results.
So this brings us to the final act. Once whistleblowers like Tyler Shultz started talking to investigative journalists, especially John Carrier at the Wall Street Journal, the whole house of cards came tumbling down with unbelievable speed. And then it became official. The U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission, the SEC, formally brought charges. And the language they used was just brutal, accusing Holmes and her company of an elaborate years-long fraud based on lies about its tech, its business, and its finances.
And the fallout from that was so fast. Just 3 months after the SEC charges, federal prosecutors hit Holmes and Balwani with criminal charges for wire fraud. By the end of that summer, what was once a $9 billion company just vanished. Theranos was officially dissolved. And that leaves us with this really critical question. The story of Theranos is such a powerful cautionary tale, right? It's about the dangers of hype, the pressure to disrupt everything at any cost, and the incredible power of a good story. In our world, where we're always searching for that next big thing, it forces us to ask, how do we tell the difference between true innovation and a dazzling but ultimately empty promise?